Okay, good evening, and thank you, Paul, for inviting me to the Larchmont Library. My name is Evan Weiner. My background is radio and TV. I've been doing this sort of thing since 1971 when I was 15 years old, when I started on WRKO radio in Rockland County in good old Mount Ivy, downtown Mount Ivy on Route 202. By the age of 21, I was on WNEW radio. Remember WNEW? William B. Williams, Make Believe Ballroom. I've done TV, done radio. I've been an op-ed columnist for various newspapers and do talks, and that's what I do. And it's not really work. It looks like it, but it's not really work. And it is 1925 and 100 years later, and that's the original Jerry Springer show, the the Scopes monkey trial. The KKK marched in Washington. The Great Gatsby, I'm sure you have the book here, The Great Gatsby. Great Gatsby was released to a collective yawn. Prohibition, well, that was taking place. The Flappers, anybody here with a relative who might have been a flapper? You were. Who?
My mother.
Your mother. She danced on tabletops?
She was still dancing in Charleston in the 50s.
In the 50s. There was one woman at a place up in White Plains, a residence, who said that her mother used to dance on tabletops in Harlem and other places, and she was sent to Catholic school because somebody had to repent. It wasn't going to be her. Anyway, the Flappers. President Calvin Coolidge, his first term, full term. In Europe, there is Adolf Hitler looking like a businessman after being released from prison. Chrysler was formed. Anybody with a Chrysler here? Chrysler car? It was formed in 1925. Any New York Giants fans here? Jets? Oh, no New York Giants fan. Well, without him, Red Grange, who never played for the Giants, the New York Giants franchise might not be here today. The Roaring Twenties, the popular image of the 1920s, is that of a decade of prosperity, riotous living, bootleggers and gangsters like Arnold Rothstein, flappers and hot jazz, the Cotton Club up in Harlem. Cab Calloway was there later on, but Duke Ellington, that was the house band at the Cotton Club. Flagpole sitters and marathon dancers. But during the 1920s, it was a decade of deep cultural conflict, pitting a more cosmopolitan, modernist, urban culture against a more provincial, traditionalist, rural culture. And this became quite evident in July. The Scopes monkey trial. And in this picture is William Jennings Bryan and Clarence Darrow. And like I said, it was the Jerry Springer show of its time. So much so that one radio station, WGN, spent a fortune of money covering the trial. Fortune of money by those days and today. It was a mixture of religion, science, and public schools, and it caught fire in Dayton, Tennessee. It was the Scopes trial, or the monkey trial, and it dominated newspaper headlines across the country. Newspaper reporters, newspaper photographers, and a microphone emerging from a medium called radio, WGN, out of Chicago, which was owned by the Chicago Tribune newspaper. The call letters, WGN, stood for World's Greatest Newspaper, and they're all there, and it's a spectacle. It's all about Darwinism. 1859, Charles Darwin's The Origin of Species is published. Darwin, in his introduction, wrote that the view which most naturalists entertain, and which I formerly entertain, namely that each species has been independently created, is erroneous. He published in 1871 a second book called The Descent of Man. In this work, he wrote that man is descended from a hairy-tailed quadruped, probably arboreal in its habits and an inhabitant of the old world. Now, this is a book called A Civic Biology. And this is the book that would get Scopes in trouble, except Scopes was looking for trouble. I'll explain that in a minute. 1914, George William Hunter's A Civic Biology is published. Civic biology describes evolution as the belief that simple forms of life on Earth slowly and gradually gave rise to those more complex, and that thus ultimately the most complex forms came into existence. Civic biology was one of the most widely used biology textbooks of its day. Hunter had a belief in the racial hierarchy of the world's population. White Anglo-Saxons were at the top. They were at the superior position in his hierarchy. Africans, they're on the bottom. Such beliefs fueled the eugenics movement. Harry Laughlin, at this point, was one of the leading eugenicists in the country, even though he had no credentials about biology, but he was hired by Congress as their quote-unquote expert. And years later, Harry Laughlin would be honored by Adolf Hitler. Anyway, such beliefs fueled the eugenics movement. By the way, some of the eugenicists were Theodore Roosevelt of his day, Helen Keller, Winston Churchill, among others, which discouraged reproduction among inferior races. This is William Jennings Bryan. He ran for president in 1896 and 1900, 1908, Secretary of State under Woodrow Wilson, and he was painted as a religious fanatic by William McKinley back in 1896 when he ran against McKinley. Jennings was the Democratic Party for quite a while. In 1921, the three-time presidential candidate and loser of 3 elections, William Jennings Bryan becomes the leader in the anti-evolution movement. Gave 2 speeches that year, The Menace of Darwinism and the Bible and its Enemies. Bryan declares in one speech, it's better to trust in the Rock of Ages than to know the age of the rocks. It is better for one to know that he's close to the Heavenly Father than to know how far the stars in the heavens are apart. On January 24th, 1924, Bryan's in Nashville, and he gives a speech called, Is the Bible True? Copies of the speech are delivered to members of the Tennessee legislature, including a guy by the name of John Washington Butler. And there is J.W. Butler behind me, and he decides, hey, why don't we have this thing called the Butler Law? On January 21st, Representative Butler introduces legislation in the Tennessee House of Representatives calling for a ban on the teaching of evolution. The proposed law, known as the Butler Bill, would prohibit the teaching of any theory that denies the story of the divine creation of man as taught in the Bible, and to teach instead that man has descended from a lower order of animals. On January 27th, the Tennessee House of Representatives approves the Butler Bill 71-5. March 13th, after several hours of heated debate, the Tennessee Senate approves the Butler Bill 24-6. On March 24th, well, let me tell you, there's a university called Austin Peay, and they play basketball. They're not a big-time basketball school, but they play basketball. And the chant to get the team going is, let's go P. Anyway, it's March 21st, and the Tennessee governor, Austin Peay, signs the Butler Bill into law. The new law is the first in the United States to ban the teaching of evolution. I am going to stand up here so I could read this. So I'm leaving you in Zoom land for a bit. The American Civil Liberties Union adds, a legal test of the Tennessee law prohibiting the teaching of evolution in public schools and colleges is being sought by the American Civil Liberties Union. By the way, anybody remember Orson Bean? Yeah, remember he was kind of rocking tour in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. His father was one of the founders of the ACLU. Anyway, a national free speech organization, according to Professor Clarence R. Skinner of Tufts College, Massachusetts, chairman of the union's Committee on Academic Freedom. Professor Skinner states that the law strikes So serious a blow at scientific teaching that we cannot let the issue rest until it has been passed upon by the highest courts. We are looking for a Tennessee teacher who is willing to accept our services in testing this law in the courts. Professor Skinner states, our lawyers think a friendly test can be arranged without costing a teacher his or her job. Distinguished counsel have volunteered their services. All we need now is a willing client. By this test, we hope to render throughout the country, for we do not believe the law will be sustained. Anyway, so they're looking. People in Tennessee, rather Dayton, Tennessee, are saying, we could make money off of this. This could be a spectacle, and we need the money. Well, the ACLU, they go out and they are looking for the client. On May 5th, a group of town leaders in Dayton, Tennessee, read the news item about the ACLU search. They quickly hatch a plan to bring the case to Dayton, a scheme that they hope will generate publicity and jumpstart the town's economy. They ask a 24-year-old science teacher and a football coach by the name of John Thomas Scopes if he would be willing to be indicted to bring the case to trial. He agrees, even though he may have taught biology as a substitute teacher, and then later says he isn't even sure if he covered evolution in the class. Well, there are Scopes, and he's arrested. On May 7th, a high school biology teacher, John T. Scopes of Dayton, Tennessee, is arrested for teaching evolution. He was a football coach. He was a science teacher, but he didn't teach biology. He was filling in as a substitute biology teacher when he taught out of a biological textbook that included evolution. The textbook was Hunter's, a civic biology. On May 12th, William Jennings Bryan agrees to participate in the trial on the side of the prosecution, assuring that the case will receive significant national interest. Several days later, well-known attorney Clarence Darrow and Dudley Field Malone announced, we're going to represent Scopes. On May 25th, Scopes is indicted by a grand jury for violating Tennessee's anti-evolution law. Just check this out. T.T. Martin headquarters, Anti-Evolution League, the conflict, hell in high school. And they're all lining up to buy William Jennings Bryan books. And there are all kind of other things. There's an arcade there, and there are monkeys running around, and everybody's having a grand old time. Like I said, it's the beginning of the Springer Show, trial of the century. Preparations begin in Dayton for an expected onslaught of trial-related publicity. 6 blocks of Dayton's main road are transformed into a pedestrian mall. A speaker's platform is built on the lawn in front of the courthouse. A tourist camp is constructed. Hey, come on down, spend your money here. We're going to all have a good time. The courtroom is outfitted with the latest technology to transmit the story to the world. Telegraph, telephone wiring, moving newsreel cameras, platforms, and radio microphones. It would be the radio microphone that would actually bring the voices there because, the moving newsreel, there's no sound. Camera platforms for the newsreels, they don't have sound. WGN Radio broadcasts the trial at a cost of more than $1,000 a day, which would be $18,000 today, just for the telephone lines. The trial would be covered, gavel to gavel, the first such broadcast of its kind. There it is. You got the Bryan over there. You got the people milling around. Behind there is the arcade and where you can buy all kinds of stuff, and the monkeys are all over the place. It is showtime. It is literally showtime. Outside the courtroom, a circus-like atmosphere reigned with barbecues, concessions, carnival games, though that died down as the trial was adjourned for the weekend, during which Bryan and Darrow sparred through the press as tensions mounted. New York Journal, which became the New York Journal American, the World Journal Tribune, and then out of business. Monkey trial lawyers fight over prayer, opening court. One thing about this, doesn't seem that John Scopes is very much involved. The trial begins on July 10th, and Scopes played almost no role in the proceedings. The most notable occasion of the trial when Darrow cross-examined Bryant about biblical literalism. The exchange did not involve Scopes at all. Trial concluded on July 21st when Scopes was found guilty of violating the Butler Act, fined $100, $1,773 today. Even though Bryant fought against Scopes, he offered to pay the fine. The ACLU also offered to pay the fine. Expectation all along was that Scopes would be convicted, and the intention was to appeal the conviction and put the Butler Act on trial, but the conviction was overturned by a higher court, and that was the end of the case. But in Dayton, they made some money. They made some money, but, one day the circus does leave town. After the trial, William Jennings Bryan hangs around. And he starts, and he thinks he's going to use his unused closing speech for rallies, but he never did get a chance to do it. He died in Dayton 5 days after the trial's end. Scopes was offered a new teaching contract, but chose to leave Dayton, study geology at the University of Chicago Graduate School, went into the oil business. Oh, by the way, the Butler Act was never enforced again. Meanwhile, Calvin Coolidge is inaugurated. First full term for him. He takes over after the death of Warren G. Harding back on August 2nd, 1923. And Coolidge is kind of interesting in this sense. He's a guy whose nickname was a silent cow. And allegedly, he didn't say much. In fact, there is a story that when I broke in, the old timers back then, who were like 70 years old when I was about 19, told me the story about how there was this woman who went up to Calvin Coolidge and said, I bet you $5 I could get you to say more than 4 words. And his response was, you lose. On November 24th, 1924, Coolidge is elected for the first time as President of the United States. He won the election rather easily, getting 382 electoral votes, about 15.7 million votes over the Democratic challenger, John W. Davis, who picked up 136 electoral votes, or about 8.4 million popular votes. The progressive candidate was a guy by the name of Robert La Follette from Wisconsin. He got 4.8 million votes, but only 13 electoral votes. The two most controversial issues of 1924, Prohibition and the growing Ku Klux Klan. Coolidge said little. His platform of lower taxes and smaller government resonated with the American people. He also used the new medium of radio very effectively in what was otherwise a very uneventful campaign. That is the Klan, and they're walking down Independence Avenue in Washington, D.C. There was a struggle between old and the new America. Immigration. Stop me if you've heard this before. Immigration, race, alcohol, evolution, gender politics, sexual morality. Did you ever hear those topics? Like the other day, except for alcohol? All became major cultural battlefields. Wets battled dries. Religious modernists battled religious fundamentalists. Urban ethnics battled the Ku Klux Klan. Hey, they were so prepared for this parade. Look at the formation. They got a K down there. They went up and down Washington like a college band at a halftime of the football game, complete with formation with that K. On August 8th, the Ku Klux Klan paraded in Washington, D.C. The Roaring '20s was also a decade in which the newly revived Ku Klux Klan expanded across the country under the guise of enforcing prohibition. The Southern Poverty Law Center reported by 1925, when the followers staged a huge Washington, D.C. march, the Klan had as many as 4 million people, and in some states, considerable political power. From the beginning, Prohibition was tied up with anti-immigrant and anti-Catholic biases. Many of the advocates were white Anglo-Saxon Protestants who thought only people like them could be real Americans. They believed the country was under siege by Catholic immigrants from countries like Italy and also Jews. And these people threatened the US with their foreign drinking habits and saloons. I'm not going to get into this now, but there was a Johnson-Reed Act that took place in 1924, which basically slammed the door on immigration and created terms like undocumented in 1924. You can read about it's called Reed-Johnson Act, the Immigration Act in 1924, and this comes on the heels of that. This is Binghamton, New York. Binghamton, Ku Klux Klan. The two major organizations that lobbied for national prohibition, the Women's Christian Temperance Union and the Men's Anti-Saloon League, blamed Catholic immigrants in the 19-teens for the saloon culture they felt was plaguing the nation. The League even argued that the U.S. needed to pass a national ban before its demographics changed too much. That came in 1924. The states ratified the 18th Amendment, the Prohibition Amendment, on January 16, 1919, takes effect in 1920. During that decade, the criminal justice system expanded as police disproportionately arrested people who were immigrants, blacks, poor, and working class. But there were also plenty of prohibition supporting white Protestants who thought the law wasn't doing enough to stop the bootleggers they read about in the tabloids. There they are. It's Washington, D.C. Middle of summer with the straw hats and all that as they paraded in Washington. The Klan began raiding Catholic immigrants' homes, burning them down, their businesses, and planting evidence to use against them. Klan wasn't necessarily trying to put these people behind bars, though many immigrants did end up in jail, but rather to terrorize these communities. The fact that the Klansmen sometimes seized alcohol only to drink it themselves was a clear sign their raids weren't just about enforcing prohibition. During the 1920s, the Klan, along with its auxiliary, women of the Ku Klux Klan, yeah, there were women of the Ku Klux Klan, and 3 KK youth groups spread across the North and South, arguing that Catholics and immigrants were breaking prohibition, and only a vigilante police group like the Klan could put a stop to it. The Klan was so mainstream in some parts of America, some local KKK groups sponsored in public baseball teams, father-son outings, beautiful baby contests, weddings, baby christenings, junior leagues, road rallies, and festivals. It reminded me, anybody see Blazing Saddles? And when the Sheriff Bard and the Waco Kid are trying to find out what's going on with the Harvey Korman character, and they put on the Klan suits, and on the back there's a smiley face. It's them. Mel Brooks steals a lot of ideas and just turns them into things like that. Now, Woodrow Wilson was the guy who really got the Klan going again. He screened the movie Birth of a Nation. D.W. Griffith's, I should read that, stupendous motion picture production. And it's based on the famous story, The Klansman. Wilson gives cover to the KKK. Well, he's also the guy that desegregated the federal government in 1913. In 1915, the KKK experienced a resurgence with the film Birth of a Nation, which romanticized and popularized the terrorist group. The movie was a hit. President Woodrow Wilson screened it at the White House and gave it a ringing endorsement. In fact, one of the cards in the movie was Wilson saying, "This is great." Woodrow Wilson was a defender of the KKK, and he was a supporter of the lost cause, the fact that the South lost the Civil War. And these are the women of the KKK. And not only that, they bring their little kids with them, the women of the KKK. Between 1920 and 1925, the Klan's membership grew to some 2 to 5 million, and there was a lot of overlap between these two members and the people who supported the prohibition. But you had to pay to get into the Klan, $10, $177 today. And again, the parade in Washington, and they were so bold that they didn't even have face coverings. They were so out there. Packaging its noxious ideology as traditionally small town values, wholesome fun, the Klan in the 1920s encouraged native-born white Americans to believe that bigotry, intimidation, harassment, extra-legal violence were all perfectly compatible with, if not central, to patriotic respectability. And I'm not going to make any more comments on that. KKK had public parades in Florida, Oregon, Tennessee, and other states. In 1917, the KKK had a high school basketball team in East Moriches, New York. When Harding died, the KKK scheduled a silent memorial service at midnight, August 4th, 1923, at the Franklin Fairgrounds in Franklin, Indiana. In the fall of 1923, an outspoken member of the KKK was elected mayor of Youngstown, Ohio. The Zanesville Times Recorder reported on November 8th that the Klan held a victory celebration for Charles F. Shibley, who was elected by an overwhelming majority over 5 opponents. The May 28th, 1924 edition of the Indianapolis News, and I don't have the picture up here, but when I was in Indianapolis in 2002, there's a plaque in downtown Indianapolis talking about the formation of the local KKK and how the Indianapolis Star had that story back whenever it was, but it's right in the middle of Indianapolis, that plaque. Anyway, the Indianapolis News told of a planned 3-day KKK festival, including a pageant with a cast of 2,000 men and women in robes, music, a parade, and a high dive exhibition by a Kokomo man from the top of a 100-foot tower into a net. The KKK planned a patriotic 4th of July extravaganza in Emporia, Kansas, the Weekly Gazette reported on June 25th. In Pontiac, Illinois, the Ku Klux Klan Quartet, they were a classical group. The KKK had 4 guys playing strings, played a public concert. The Bloomington Pantograph reported August 13th. And there was a KKK baseball team. And they went out and they played against black guys. On June 21st, the KKK wanted to improve its image. So they decided to have a match against a Negro League baseball team. The game was against the Wichita Moravians, and the KKK would send out the Wichita Klan 6. There was a statement sent out in the newspapers. No strangleholds, razors, horsewhips, and other violent implements of argument are allowed. And the umpires, they were Irish Catholics, so the KKK could try and rack up the, we're not the racists you think we are, points. The Moravians won the game 10-8. Again, here they are in Washington, D.C., and this is the biggest showing of the second version of the Ku Klux Klan. Ku Klux Klan marched down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington. The event brought 25,000 members in full regalia to the city, demonstrating at the height of their power, the KKK was a national fraternal organization founded on the premise of white supremacy. And they hung around at night. There they are at night. The Washington, D.C. parade probably marked the peak of the Klan's popularity. Coolidge did not make a public statement on the march, but in subsequent statements, he was not happy with the march. In his first State of the Union message in 1923, Coolidge called for a major appropriation to a traditionally black school, Howard University in Washington, D.C. 1924, Coolidge gave the commencement address at Howard University. Does anybody want to sit on the flagpole? Anybody? See that rope there? The thing that's going down? When Shipwreck Kelly had to relieve himself, it was tied into him and it went right down that pipe. Shipwreck Kelly. The 1925 Cultural War combatants had one thing in common. They wanted to make money, but most people did not have the opportunity to do so. For wealthy white Americans, the Roaring '20s was a time of immense economic prosperity. Yet for most Americans, it wasn't. Low-paying jobs paid an average of $25 a week for men, $437 today, $18 for women, $322 a week in today's money. The speakeasy party culture popularized in books, movies, and magazines was only accessible to a small portion of wealthy, urban, and mostly white males, Americans. And it was not widespread. The Great Gatsby took place in a little area of Long Island, and that's where the whole book takes place, basically. Many workers' wages did not keep up with productivity or fell off completely. For farmers in particular, the Great Depression began after World War I. Banks were failing. So how many of you were forced to read this in high school? Did you like it?
Yes.
It is a very, very small percentage of people of the United States. It's like 20, 20 of them, and that's about it. This book was a dud when it came out. It fell flat on its face. On April 10th, F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby is released to the public. Set in New York City and Long Island, actually it's set in Queens, right over the Nassau County border. During the Roaring '20s, the focus of the story is the title character, Jay Gatsby, and his unswerving desire to be reunited with Daisy Buchanan, the love he lost 5 years earlier. Nick Carraway, who happens to be both Gatsby's neighbor and Daisy's cousin, narrates Gatsby's journey from poverty to wealth into the arms of his beloved and eventually to death. That is Zelda. That is his wife. And there she is, dressed as a flapper, complete with the cigarette and the flapper dress and the hairdo and all. So there she is, Zelda Fitzgerald. The novel was a flop, sold poorly after its release. The book got mixed reviews, sold about 20,000 units. The Great Gatsby captured a certain part of the early 1920s, 1922, and it would be Fitzgerald who coined the term the Jazz Age. Fitzgerald was, in fact, holding up a mirror to the society of which he was part. The Great Gatsby addresses the social issues of the period, materialism, and displaced spirituality. And if you go to Great Neck, well, they got a street called the Great Gatsby Way in Great Neck, where allegedly that all took place. Set on the prosperous Long Island near the New York City borough of Queens on the Nassau County border, New York, 1922. F. Scott Fitzgerald's is a fictional narrative of jazz music, economic prosperity, flapper culture, libertine mores, rebellious youth, and speakeasies. And he uses many of these societal developments to tell the story, from simple details like, wait, they petted in automobiles back in those days? They sat in the back seat of cars? Actually, they wouldn't, because there was no back seat in most cars. To broader themes such as bootlegging as the illicit source of Gatsby's fortune. This is a real character in The Great Gatsby. Her name was Edith Cummings, and she was the first woman athlete ever to be on the cover of Time magazine. She grew up around golf courses in Lake Forest, Illinois. One of her first tournament victories was at the age of 17. Her brother Dexter captured the intercollegiate title twice in the 1920s. She was famous, and she's in the book. Her 1924 victory at the Women's Weston Amateur made her famous. She's on the cover, Time magazine, August 24th, 1924. Published tomorrow, Scott Fitzgerald's new novel, Great Gatsby, $2, which would mean, was it $2? Yeah, $2, which means $34 today, or 35. Fitzgerald modeled his character in The Great Gatsby, Jordan Baker. Recall the character Jordan Baker? Anyway, she was modeled after Cummings. He met her through Ginevra King, the inspiration of Daisy Buchanan. Thomas Buchanan, Daisy's husband, had certain parallels with William Bill Mitchell, the Chicago businessman who married Ginevra King. Speakeasies were the Prohibition's worst kept secret. All you needed to know was the password, and Harpo, I think, knows the password. Swordfish. He's able to get in. Anyway, the world's worst kept secret When Prohibition took effect January 17th, 1920, many thousands of formerly legal saloons across the country, catering to only men like McSorley's, which was in downtown, that was, well, I guess, desegregated, for lack of a better word, in the 1970s, closed down. But people who wanted to drink could buy liquor from licensed druggists for medicinal purposes, clergymen for religious reasons, or illegal sellers known as bootleggers, or maybe your Aunt Mary just made some up in the bathtub. I've had about 9 people tell me that their relatives did do the bathtub gin that they made, and every Saturday night at this tenement on the Lower East Side, it was party time because the aunt made the stuff. Another option was to enter private unlicensed bar rooms, nicknamed speakeasies, for how low you had to speak the password to gain entry so not to be overheard by law enforcement. I was in Rockland County the other day, going down Middletown Road, and there's a place called the Nanuet Hotel there. Back when I was there in the late 1970s, the owner said, "Here, come to the back room." He said, "Now it's a party room, but this is where our speakeasy was." And it still was, at least 45, 50 years ago, still decorated with the furniture of that day. Anyway, but they had to speak low, the password, so the law enforcement officers who were inside drinking wouldn't know somebody's coming in. Anyway, the Maine law, and that's a lobsterman up in Portland, Maine. The Maine law, the temperance movement had its origins in Maine. The first World's Temperance Society was founded in Portland in 1815. State Organization of Temperance Societies was formed in 1834, and within a dozen years had developed enough political clout to force the enactment of a state law prohibiting the sale of alcoholic spirits except for medicinal and mechanical purposes. Guess your combine needed some alcohol. Portland's Neil Dowd, known internationally as the father of Prohibition, led the way, and Maine approved a total ban on the manufacturing and sale of liquor, 1851. Of course, across the water there on Maine's northern border was New Brunswick, or British North America, or Canada, and you could always get a stash to be smuggled in. This is 2 blocks from the State House in Boston, near the Hooker entrance. Yeah, this entrance to the State House is called the Hooker entrance, named after a guy named Hooker, maybe somebody else. Anyway, but down the block is Carrie Nation, featuring Boston's original speakeasy. Carrie Nation's the one who busted up saloons, and they thought, hey, why not? Why not? On January 19th, 1919, Congress ratified the 18th Amendment banning the manufacture, sale, transportation of alcoholic beverages. The rum runners had specially made rum running boats that could travel at a much faster speed than any of the boats the Coast Guard had in its fleet. This allowed them to avoid being raided, arrested, and having their shipment confiscated by law enforcement officials amidst the run. And there they are. They're out in the open. People knew that they were there. There they are. And Americans are going to get their boost. In fact, Arnold Rothstein, familiar with Arnold Rothstein? For those of you who aren't familiar with Arnold Rothstein, he put the word organized in organized crime. He also bet and won a lot of money on the 1919 World Series that was fixed. He had a whole fleet of vessels coming in from Europe with stash on it. And they didn't know. They didn't know. Anyway, the rum runners. Rum Row was set up not long after federal prohibition was passed, which was a line of Canadian fishing vessels set up along the Canadian coastline north of Maine. They positioned themselves just outside the 3-mile limit of the country, just far enough away from the Coast Guard patrol boats. The rum runners would buy their shipments off of Canadian fishermen and would be able to outrun the Coast Guard. It was impossible to enforce the prohibition law. I worked with a guy by the name of Jim Gannon about 40 years ago at Mutual Radio, and he was from Chicago, and we were talking about Elliot Ness one day, and he said, Elliot Ness exaggerated everything. absolutely exaggerated. He met Capone once, and that, of course, was the basis of the TV show The Untouchables with Robert Stack as Elliot Ness. And Jim said, everybody in Chicago knew Elliot Ness knew how to tell a story. And look, 4 years, Desi Arnaz put The Untouchables on as part of the Desi loop. Prohibition agents lacked training and numbers to battle bootleggers. The country's 48 states and the territories, Guam, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, and Hawaii and Alaska at that point. They said to the feds, you take care of it. Prohibition agents and corporate cooperative local law enforcers throughout the country did seize warehouses filled with whiskey, busted up stills, smashed countless bottles of liquor, took axes to beer barrels, dumped them, the contents into gutters and sewers. And there's Al Capone. I'm going to tell you a story about working at the Rockland Drive-In Movie Theater on Route 59 in Muncie, New York, when I was 18 years old. And everybody knew I was going to go into journalism who worked there. And they said, go talk to our projectionist. I said, why? They say he was a bootlegger during Prohibition. He was also a flyer during World War I, which was an interesting story. So his name was Albert Morris. So I go up there and he looks at me, says some derogatory thing about me, but then again, I was 18 years old at the time. And I said, I understand you work for Capone. Who told you? Told you. I said, did you? No. I said, but I heard that you picked up stuff in Suffern, which was you went north to Montreal and west to Chicago. You lived in Spring Valley. So I heard you used to go to Suffern. Who told you? So what'd you do? So well, I used to pick up something in Suffern. What'd you pick up? I picked it up, put it in my bathtub, put water in it, and then took it back out to Suffern. Where did it go? Did it go west? I don't know. Who paid you? They left cash there. Well, who left the cash? I don't know. This was 1974. This is 40 years after Prohibition ended. He wasn't giving up anybody. He wasn't giving up anybody at all, like Capone. What Prohibition agents and state and local police found daunting to enforce would evolve into a virtually impossible task later, even after the feds expanded to 3,000 agents late in the era. Local police officials took payoffs from bootleggers in exchange for looking the other way and tipping them off about federal raids. I was at a place in Lake Tahoe about 20 years ago, and it was kind of a B&B, and it was kind of a lunchroom. I was talking to the guy, and he said, you want to see my big room in the back? And there was a big room where they have all kinds of things. And the table there, he said, this is the card table. Flip it over, and there's nothing there. He said they used to get tips by wire from Sacramento that they were going to be busted. But Sacramento, which is 90 miles away as you drive, so they had plenty of time to convert the room. And it's a museum now, that place. And they never found anything there. They heard things were going, but they never found anything. Tipping, I have pictures of that place too. Al Capone was having his way with the liquor rackets in Chicago. The Coast Guard used speedboats and retired military ships to pursue, board and seize vessels of rum runners smuggling liquor into the country on the Great Lakes, the Atlantic Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, and the Pacific Ocean. Flappers, there they are. They're having a good old time, aren't they? The Flappers. I told you about the woman whose mother was a flapper, that she sent her to Catholic school to repent. United States involvement in World War II started in 1917, lasted till the war's end in 1918. During that time, when the boys were fighting in Europe, women had to hold down the fort in the United States. When the war ended, many women were used to independence and had developed a carefree attitude. Many women, but not all women, got the right to vote in 1920. Some restrictions as to the women who could vote. Native American, well, they weren't citizens till 1924, the Snyder Act. Asian Americans, Latinx, and African American women were excluded. The culture quickly shifted from women being expected to be wives who were subordinate to their husbands to women valuing independence and breaking the rules. Many young women became flappers. And they were also known as the lost girls. These were girls who we couldn't get back. They were irredeemable. Unlike their mothers and grandmothers, flappers tended to go to high school and even college. I speak somewhere in Riverdale, and this woman who was she's about 90 years old was talking about her mother, and she came from an Orthodox Jewish Yiddish-speaking family, and they moved to Brooklyn. She went to Brooklyn College. She got a degree, and she was the black sheep. Oh, she was the black sheep of the family because she was a woman who got a degree. They even devoured new books featuring confident, fun-loving adolescent heroines who hiked and camped and solved mysteries. Flappers biked. They played golf. They played tennis. And they wanted to emulate the flat-chested, hipless physiques of adolescent boys whose freedom and lack of domestic responsibilities they envied. But of course, they were a grave source of concern to parents, educators, physicians, clergymen who feared women playing sports and getting a higher education would be ruinous. 1973, when Title IX was passed, which gave women equal opportunity in education to men in school 51 and a half years ago. One of the detractors of the Title IX amendments said that if you allowed women to compete with men equally in colleges, you would ruin education. 1973. And there they are. They're having a good old time. Their knees aren't rouged. Some flappers rouge their knees with red, saying, "We're open for business." The post-war prosperity expressed itself in many ways. One of the first, the availability of credit, not national line, but local stores. Department stores opened as the middle class could now use credit to obtain upper-class luxuries, leading to the birth of consumerism. With it came the flapper's dress, mass-produced for public consumption. This could be right out of QVC. Is that what it's called, QVC? Yeah, this is right out of QVC. 100 years ago. New cosmetic companies sold skin cream to eradicate wrinkles. They do that on QVC. Magazines, instead of QVC, advertised flapper hairstyles and clothing, plus extreme diets and dubious claims for the slimming effect of cigarettes and chewing gum. Some women resorted to a new vogue in cosmetic surgery, kicking off an era of damaging self-scrutiny, obsession with weight, youthfulness, and body image. That is Louise Brooks, who only made about 4 silent movies, but is famous for those 4 silent movies, and her hairstyle, the bob. A flapper cut her hair short into what was called a bob. She wore shorter dresses, rouged her knees and her cheeks. She drank alcohol, smoked cigarettes, dated multiple men before marriage. There was increased access to birth control, such as the diaphragm, so they could experiment before they got married. They went to speakeasies, which was a place they drank alcohol provided by gangsters. Oh, there's Al Jolson, who was the first celebrity ever to endorse a president. He endorsed Warren G. Harding in 1920, went to Harding, wrote a song for him. Harding's the man and all. And here he is palling around with Calvin Coolidge. I remember back in those days, it was Jolson, it was Babe Ruth, it was Jack Dempsey, it was Rudolph Valentino. These were the icons upon icons upon icons, internationally known. On the surface, the economy was good during Calvin Coolidge's presidency, started in August 1923, following the death of Harding. But a closer look at Coolidge's prosperity suggests something else. During the years of the Coolidge prosperity, business corporations reaped unprecedented riches as profits soared by 62%, but wages went up by only 7%. Does that sound familiar? Does it? Bank failures. Coolidge's failure to aid the depressed agriculture sector seemed short-sighted. 464 rural banks in the Midwest and South shut their doors in bankruptcy, while many thousands of farmers lost their lands. His tax cuts contributed to an uneven distribution of wealth and overproduction of goods. Many Americans were deeply in debt for having purchased consumer goods on easy installment credit terms. The prosperity, well, there was no prosperity on the farms. Despite agricultural overproduction and successive attempts in Congress to provide relief, the agriculture economy of the 1920s experienced an ongoing depression. Large surpluses were accompanied by falling prices at a time when American farmers were burdened by heavy debt. The Coolidge prosperity was not distributed evenly. It's Coolidge. It was the banker, Andrew Mellon, 1979. I'm 23 years old. I'm interviewing Jack Kemp, who's running for president up in Spark Hill, New York, Rockland Country Club. And he spent a half hour talking about supply side economics, and his hero was Andrew Mellon. Coolidge is Secretary of the Treasury, one of the world's richest men who engineered successful tax reductions. The group that did not fare well during Coolidge's prosperity in the 1920s was primarily lower and middle income American families. But the group who did well, bootleggers. Coolidge personally opposed Prohibition, but sought to enforce federal law and refrained from serving liquor in the White House. It's over there. George M. Cohan, over there. The First World War, subsequent peace settlements gave rise to new ambitions, rivalries, and tensions. People had expectations that the post-war peace settlement would create a new world order and ensure the slaughter of the First World War was never repeated. These are the four guys who divided up Europe: President Woodrow Wilson of the United States, Clemenceau of France, Orlando of Italy, and David Lloyd George of England. They were the big four. The war ended November 18th, 1918, after more than 4 years of fighting and the loss of millions of lives. Treaty of Versailles, signed in June 1919, created the League of Nations, an international body intended to promote peace and prevent war. America never joined the League of Nations for various reasons, including isolationism. However, the treaty was an unequal compromise with the victorious allies. Britain goes its way, America goes its way, France goes its way, and Mussolini is gaining power in Italy. Germany was forced to surrender, disarm, and pay for the war's damages. These divisive conditions were criticized as overly vindictive by many in Britain and America. Treaty's terms caused an immediate outrage and lasting bitterness in Germany and led to the rise of him. The Treaty of Versailles also left Germany in a surprisingly strong geographic position. Poland, Czechoslovakia, the Baltic states are all created, and that put a buffer between Germany and its traditional ally, or rather rival, Russia. Fighting among the new states like Poland weakened them, and the geography of the new borders made it difficult to defend. Germany emerged from the war with a smaller, relatively weaker states on its eastern border. Treaty of Lausanne, 1923, ends the war. The treaty is signed by France, Britain, Italy, Germany, Greece, and Romania with the new Republic of Turkey. So why did Hitler hate Jews? This is one of the stereotypical cartoons in newspapers at that time. I'm not sure if that's a man or a woman with the Jewish star, because there's cleavage there. Spindly fingers, the knife in the back of the Aryan-looking German soldier. During World War I, between 1914 and 18, Hitler was a soldier in the German army. At the end of the war, he and many other German soldiers like him couldn't get over the defeat of German Empire, like Ludendorff, who was the guy who was the commander. And Ludendorff and the army command spread the myth that the army had not lost the war in the battlefield, but they'd been betrayed. Anybody see Wonder Woman about 7-8 years ago? There's a character named Ludendorff in there. You know who he's named after? The guy who lost the war in Germany and spread the big lie that somebody knifed us in the back. By stab in the back, as it was called at the time, Hitler bought into the myth, the big lie. Jews and communists had betrayed the country and brought a left-wing government to power that wanted to throw in the towel. Since February 24th, 1920, Munich, Germany, Hitler lays out what would be the Nazi platform. His central idea was to strengthen German citizenship by excluding and controlling Jewish people and others deemed non-German. But there's a problem with that. He's from Austria. So under the Hitler doctrine, he would be deported. Some Germans began to support Adolf Hitler, even though Hitler was an Austrian citizen and non-German. Mein Kampf comes out in 1924-25. He writes the memoir while he was in jail, and he predicted a general European war that would result in the extermination of the Jewish race in Germany. Mein Kampf was written in jail after Hitler was arrested for his participation in the beer hall push in Munich, November 9th and 10th, 1923, when the Nazi Party tried to overthrow the German government. He goes to jail. He doesn't have to wear a prisoner's uniform, has his own secretary. It was like high-class living in December 1924. That's the Nazi Party 1922. By blaming the Jews for the defeat, Hitler created a stereotypical enemy. In the 1920s, the defeated country was still in a major economic crisis. According to the Nazis, expelling the Jews was the solution to all problems in Germany. Hitler was on parole, faced the possibility of being deported to his Austrian homeland, so he's muzzled. He did get 27,100 members of the Nazi Party, and he was determined to build that number up. The Locarno Pact, a series of treaties negotiated in October in the lakeside resort of Locarno, Switzerland, signed December 1st. Germany accepts the term of the Versailles treaties, and there's new boundaries between France and Germany. Meanwhile, Benito Mussolini starts his rise to power. It's generally agreed in a speech Benito Mussolini gave to the Italian parliament on January 3rd, in which he asserted the right to supreme power and effectively became the dictator of Italy, was the start of his form of fascism. He was able to operate openly as a dictator, styling himself El Duce and fusing the state and the fascist party. On Christmas Eve, December 24th, a decree on powers of the head of government declared the prime minister was now the head of government, and head of government was not responsible to the parliament. Only the king could remove the head of government, and nothing could be placed on parliament's agenda without the consent of the head of government, giving Mussolini the ability to block all dissent. Here's Walter Chrysler. He's got a Chrysler. On June 6th, the Chrysler Corporation was officially formed by Walter P. Chrysler out of the ailing Maxwell Motor Company. Anybody remember Jack Benny? And remember, what was his car? It's the Maxwell, which was out of business, which was the joke. The first Chrysler car was introduced in 1924. The company then purchased the American Motor Body Company, creating a body supply source. Chrysler had arrived at the ailing Maxwell Chandler's Company, early 1920s, hired to overhaul the company's troubled operations after a similar rescue job at the Willys Overland Car Company. In late 1923, the production of the Chandler's automobile was ended. Now, there are no New York Giants fans here, right? None. Kind of wasting the story then. But then again, hey, how about Zoomland? Any Giant stories? Raise your hand if you are. Anyway, Red Grange saves the NFL. Late 1924, the National Football League gained national recognition when All-American halfback Harold Red Grange, before his college eligibility was up at the University of Illinois, signed a contract to play with the Chicago Bears franchise, even though he had finished college, and even though college players were playing in college on Saturday and the NFL on Sunday behind face masks, so nobody knew who was playing. Grange was the big star of the season, playing for the University of Illinois. He was a galloping ghost. Grange gave the pro game legitimacy. It clearly violated NFL rules against signing players, but George Haliser's running Chicago Bears and the NFL didn't care before his college eligibility was up, and it may have saved the NFL. And there is Red Grange. On Thanksgiving day, a crowd of 36,000, the largest in pro football history, watched Grange and the Bears play the Chicago Cardinals at Wrigley Field. The beginning of December, the Bears went on an 8-game, 12-day barnstorming tour. St. Louis, Philadelphia, New York, Washington, Boston, Pittsburgh, Detroit, back to Chicago. And Red Grange saved the New York Giants franchise, even though the Giants don't want you to know that, but he did. It's December 6th. A crowd of 73,000 watched the Bears play the Giants at the Polo Grounds. The contest set a pro football record for attendance. More importantly, it wiped out the New York Giants' debt and put Tim Mara, who was both a bootlegger and a bookie, don't get me into the Mara family, Tim Mara's Giants in the black by over $18,000, which would be $324,000 today, helping assure the future of the troubled franchise in New York. The Pro Football Polo Grounds record attendance was beaten when the Bears defeated the Los Angeles Tigers in the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum before 75,000 people a few weeks later. Anybody ever been to the Grand Ole Opry? Oh, it's great. I was there and I said, I'm probably not going to like it. It was great. Porter Wagner was the guy who was the MC. What was even better, all the performers hung out like, around the wall till they were called down to the bandstand, did their thing, and went back. Little Jimmy Dickens, who Johnny Carson made famous back in the 1960s because he did a song, May the Bluebird of Happiness Fly Up Your Nose, was the guy who I saw that night, among other things. It was great. We spent 5 hours there. We were there all night. It was great. I was at the Rodman Auditorium, the old church, where he's at right now. They have a newer venue in uptown Nashville. But anyway, the WSM Barn Dance on November 28th, a month after Nashville's WSM Radio's first show, National Life and Accidental Insurance Company hired George D. Hay, a prominent announcer and program director, known for his national barn dance on WLS in Chicago. WLS was owned by Sears Roebuck. WLS was world's largest store, Sears. Hay launched the WMS Barn Dance with Uncle Jimmy Thompson, a 77-year-old fiddle player who'd be 177 years old today. WMS was short for the insurance company slogan, "We Shield Millions." The name of the show would change to Grand Ole Opry. And speaking of WLS, that is now the Willis Tower in Chicago. I tried to get that picture during sunset in Chicago, and that's the best I could do. On February 2nd, as an experiment in the North Lawndale Sears Roebuck and Company complex in Chicago, Sears and Roebuck opened a store. Richard Warren Sears started a mail-order watch business in Minneapolis, 1866, calling it the R.W. Sears Watch Company. That year, he met Alva Curtis Roebuck, a watch repairman. 1877, Sears and Roebuck relocated the business to Chicago, and the company published Richard Sears' first mail order catalog, which today is Amazon. Let's face it, it is Amazon today. How many of you remember the Sears catalog? Nobody? You do. Did you ever buy anything out of it?
No.
Nope. But it was Sears. It was the Amazon of its day. And it offered watches and diamonds and jewelry. You could buy a house through there. 1924, the company decided to go into the brick and mortar business. The legacy of 1925. You got the book Inherit the Wind here?
Oh, yeah.
You may have the movie here too. Spencer Tracy, Frederick March, Gene Kelly, Inherit the Wind. 1955, a play written by Jerome Lawrence and Robert E. Lee about the Scopes trial called Inherit the Wind debuted in Dallas, Texas. The well-reviewed play has had many revivals worldwide. A film based on the play starring Spencer Tracy and Frederick March premiered in 1960. Inherit the Wind has been remade for television several times. John Scopes, in the story of his trial, is featured in an episode of the television game show To Tell the Truth on October 10th, 1960. If you have YouTube interested, look up Scopes To Tell the Truth, and you will find the episode. In June 1967, Scopes wrote, Center of the Storm, Memoirs of John T. Scopes, and the Butler Act was repealed that year. The KKK, probably the most decisive factor in the KKK's downfall, took place in 1925 when a major scandal broke out involving one of the Klan's most celebrated leaders, David C. Stevenson, the powerful Grand Cyclops of Indiana, whose power extended beyond Indiana to several other Midwest states. Stevenson abducted, raped, and murdered a young woman, for which, after a sensational trial, he was sent to prison. His fall into disgrace was a major blow to the KKK, doing it untold damage, especially among its faithful. There would be another revival of the Klan in the 50s and 60s in the civil rights era. The Great Gatsby is on Broadway. It's on Broadway. It was largely considered forgettable and a commercial failure after it was published. It was only after World War II, when free copies of the novels were sent to U.S. servicemen overseas, that the book was re-examined and became a core part of American high school curriculums. The book has had a remarkable life after Fitzgerald's death in 1940 and is constantly subject of movies and plays and students. Did you have to write your thoughts on the book? Yeah, what was your thoughts?
I mean, some parts were definitely hard to comprehend. It was like,
It's 100 years ago.
yeah, but it was really interesting.
Yeah. It wasn't when it came out.
Yeah, I guess not.
No, and why? Because it only featured a slice of life for rich people in the early 1920s. Oh, somebody rated that. 1932, Franklin Roosevelt ran for president on the platform that called for Prohibition's repeal. He easily defeated the incumbent Herbert Hoover. In February 1933, Congress adopted a resolution proposing 21st Amendment to the Constitution that would repeal the 18th. The amendment was submitted to the states December 1933. Utah, of all places, Utah. They were the 36th state to say yes, and that's all that was needed. The Maine law remained in effect in one form or another until the repeal of national prohibition in 1934. The flappers. The flapper lifestyle and look disappeared, and the roaring 20s era of glitz and glamour came to an end in America after the Wall Street crash, 1929. Unable to afford the latest trends and lifestyles, the once vibrant flapper women returned to their dropped hemlines, and the flapper dress disappeared. 1963, Betty Friedan of Upper Grandview on the Hudson, and there's a statue of her there right across the Tappan Zee Bridge, released the book, The Feminine Mistake, which referenced the flappers. The book was the start of the 1960s women's rights movement, and you probably have that book here as well, Feminine Mistake. Here's Coolidge. Historians do not rank Coolidge's presidency very highly. He's in the bottom third of the people who served as president. He's rated poorly for crisis management, lack of imagination, and failing to work for equal justice for all Americans. Yet, on June 24th, 1924, President Calvin Coolidge signed the bill granting Native Americans full citizenship. He refused to use the country's economic boom to help struggling farmers and workers in other flailing industries. Some of his policies led to the 1929 stock market crash. He's out of office 7 months when the bottom fell out of the market. No Nazis, Rostock, Germany, former East Germany there. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party rose to power in 1932. Germany annexed Austria and Czechoslovakia in 1933. Germany invaded Poland September 1st, 1939. That starts World War II. Japan bombed Pearl Harbor December 7th, 1941. Americans get in the war the next day. Mussolini and Hitler were allies during World War II. The war ended in 1945. The Nazi Party has been outlawed in Germany. There's Red Grange again. When a bid by Red Grange and his agent, C.C. Pyle, cash and carry Pyle, to buy a piece of the Bears franchise was rejected by coach and owner George Halas, the two formed their own league, the American Football League. In 1926, Grange playing for the New York Yankees football team. The league folded after 1 year. The Yankees franchise, though, joined the NFL, but in the third game of the 1927 season, Grange suffered such a severe knee injury, he was never the same player. Sears, that's up in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, that crossed the bridge, St. Mary's Bridge, which is the heaviest, in terms of goods, the heaviest traffic bridge between the US and Canada up in Sault Ste. Marie, because there's not another bridge until you get out to the west. That is the St. Mary's Bridge. You can look that up. Anyway, the barn dance was renamed the Grand Ole Opry 2 years later, courtesy of an unscripted moment of on-air inspiration by the host, George D. Hay, on December 10th, 1927. Hay's turn of a phrase, Grand Ole Opry, affecting a rural Southern American accent, resonated with listeners and was an instant sensation. The Grand Ole Opry remains a major country music showcase. There are 8 stores in the United States that carry the Sears name. 8 stores, United States and territories. The department store chain operated 3,500 stores in its heyday. 2018, the company filed for bankruptcy after years of declining sales. By the way, in Mexico, Carlos Slim bought the Sears name, and they're doing well in Mexico, but it's not Sears. Chrysler is still selling cars. Any questions, any comments? It is your turn to talk out there.